The new gate was a next-generation VR MMORPG which allowed players to adventure freely. But all of a sudden, it became a death battle which prevented players from logging out. Players who lost their lives in the game also ceased to exist in real life. A group of skeletons are battling some of the players on an open field. Several players get cut down by the skeleton soldiers and they lose their lives. A girl is about to get defeated in the game when a man suddenly comes to her aid chivalrously. The girl wonders who he is, but he doesn't have time for mindless conversation as he takes down the skeletons. He is a player who keeps fighting with the hopes of bringing an end to the game. He left his subordinates behind to try to achieve this feat some time ago. He promised them he would be back, but soon after leaving them, he was engaged in a boss fight. The boss tries to attack him, but he manages to evade the attack. He wasn't surprised the boss was still able to attack quickly despite its huge size. He tries to land a fatal attack on the boss, but the boss dodges, only taking slight damage. The player decides to calm himself so he doesn't lose focus and get desperate. He suddenly notices the boss's HP regenerating and its wounds healing. He decides to do something about that and he charges at the boss. He tries to land another fatal strike on the boss, but the boss blocks it. The force of the strike is so great that the boss loses its balance. He decides to use that opportunity to land a devastating strike on the boss. The player was hoping to take the boss down, but it starts healing up again. He decides to put an end to the boss once and for all with a huge final blow. He powers up his sword and rushes at the boss. He launches into the air and uses his momentum to bring down his sword, reducing the boss to dust. The game system announces the defeat of the boss and it bestows the player with his new titles. It announces that players can now log out since the dungeon has been cleared. The player is glad he was able to clear the dungeon. He decides to check if other players are logging out of the game. He opens the online scroll and he confirms that players are leaving the game globally. Even one else leaves and only his name remains on the online scroll. Shin, the player, is the only one left, so he decides to log out but realizes he can't. A huge gate suddenly opens behind him, which makes him think he's beaten the game. He gets absorbed into the game and he wakes up on a grassy plain. He wonders if he's in the game world, but it looks too realistic. He knows that VR technology hasn't improved so much to make such a world. He decides to pull up some game windows, but in the process, he notices that his stats have increased massively. He concludes that it's a result of defeating the final boss. He knows that he should be able to log out since he has beaten the game, but he notices that the logout button is missing from the game screen. He tries to check the online scroll to see if other players are online, but the game tells him he's not connected to the game network. He wonders how he's able to move if he's not connected to the game network. He realizes the game world is his new reality, and he almost freaks out. He decides to gather himself after he realizes that lying around won't help him in any way. He uses an item that'll take him back to his home base. The item leads the way and he follows him. On his way there, he spots some new roadside structures that weren't there before, and he wonders when they were built. He arrives at his base to see several bandits forcing an elf girl to take them to her master. They drag the elf girl away from the base since she refuses to disclose the information. The elf girl crosses a barrier which triggers a huge monster, which is the guard animal of the base. The bandits run away while the monster tries to attack the girl. Shin rushes to take down the monster, and he realizes that he can adjust the power of his magic skills, but physical skills take a toll on him. He can't believe how real the game now feels. They go back into the base, and the elf introduces herself as Tiara. She wonders if Shin knows her master, but Shin doesn't know who she's talking about. She tells him her master's name is Shni, and Shin combs through his memory trying to recall someone by that name. He suddenly remembers that an elf who was his support character bears that name, and he describes her features to Tiara. Shin asks Tiara about Shni's whereabouts, but she refuses to disclose the information to him because he is suspicious. She tells him she can keep a message for her master, and she tells him the cost of leaving a message is 1,000 jewels. He tells her he just has jails which he takes out of his item box. Tiara is shocked by this because only elders and kings of a limited species can use item boxes. She also informs him that jails are worth about 10 billion jewels, which surprises Shin because he remembers jails were the smaller currency in the game. Tiara wonders who he is, and he tells her he's just an adventurer who chose High Human as his species when he started the game. She tells him the High Humans went extinct, which shocks Shin. She informs him that the High Humans went missing during the dusk of prosperity 500 years ago. Shin isn't familiar with the event, and she tells him it was an occurrence that led to the disappearance of a lot of people. Shin figures out that the major event could have happened when people who were trapped in the game went missing. He realizes that the current world is 500 years after the events of the game. Tiara snaps Shin back to reality, and he gives her the one jail as thanks for the information she provided. She refuses the gift because it would be stupid to give someone something so valuable after just meeting them. He promises not to ask for it back, and Tiara accepts it, happy to be able to hold a jail coin in her hands. Shin tells her it would be useful to her since she's an elf, but Tiara is surprised that Shin can see she's an elf. She tells him she had her master cast an illusion spell on her because black-haired elves are seen as a cursed symbol of misfortune. She tells him she was kicked out of her village because her black hair caused monsters to attack too frequently, but her master came to her rescue. She tells him she has lived in secrecy for over 100 years, thanks to her master's protection. Shin wonders if the curse can be broken, and she tells him her master is currently in search of a cure. Tara tells Shin she's content to live in secrecy, but Shin wonders if her hair has always been black. She tells him it used to be silver until she was cursed, which made her hair turn black. Shin decides to brainstorm, and he figures out that the girl can be cured. He opens his skill menu, but the girl can't see it, so she wonders what he's doing. He uses his analyze skill, which shows him Tiara has the cursed gift. He informs her that the cursed gift is the reason why she always gets attacked by monsters. Tiara tells him identifying the curse isn't enough to cure it, but Shin uses his purify skill to cure her. After the skill ends, Tiara wonders if the purify skill failed. Shin tells her the skill worked, but only part of her hair changed back. Tiara is surprised by this, and she hurriedly looks at herself in the mirror. Shin tries to console her, but he's surprised when she thanks him so sincerely for taking away part of the curse. She's glad to see some part of her silver hair after waiting over 100 years. She thanks Shin for renewing her hope in a cure, and Shin suggests that she tries exiting the barrier. He reassures her that she'll be fine because he'll defeat any monster who attacks her. Tiara remains skeptical, but he tells her to take a leap of faith, and she decides to step out of the barrier. They walk through a nearby forest till they arrive at a grassy plateau, and Shin tells Tiara her curse has been lifted since they were not attacked by monsters on the way. Tiara sheds tears of joy, happy to be able to look at the beautiful sky again. They head back to the base, and she thanks Shin for helping her. Tiara wondered what Shin would do in the meantime since her master wasn't arriving anytime soon. He decides to check out a nearby town to look for his other support characters and learn about the new game world. She gives him a letter of instruction to take to the kingdom he saw on his way to the base. She informs him that the letter would let him bypass the inspection line, and Shin teases her about giving things to a stranger. She tells him it's thanks for helping her lift her curse. Shin decides to leave the base, and Tiara promises to inform him once her master returns. Shin goes to the kingdom, and he's able to skip the inspection line. He can't believe a letter of introduction would give him such a privilege. The guard escorting him warns him not to lose the letter because it's so important it could grant him an audience with the king. The guard takes him to the Adventurers Guild, and Shin decides to gather some information. Shin enters the guild, and a guild worker welcomes him. He tells her he would like to register as an adventurer, and she points him to the counter where applications are accepted. He arrives at the counter, but he's surprised to see the same person. The worker notices this, and she asks him what's wrong. He tells her she looks like the person at the front door, and she informs him that that's her older twin sister named Celica. She introduces herself as Silica, then she tells him to drop an application fee and fill out a form. After a while, Shin sits in the guild waiting for the guild workers. He can't believe it takes almost a day to create a guild card. He looks around at the other adventurers, and he notices their weapons and armor are low level. He realizes that their equipment is of lower quality than they were in the game. Celica suddenly comes up to Shin, and she thanks him for waiting on the guild staff. She presents him with a snack, and she sits with him. She urges him to have a bite, and he tries it, but he can't continue eating because he notices Celica staring at him. She tells him she wants to confirm something, and Shin wonders what she wants to know. She asks him if he has a letter of introduction from his base, and he confirms it. She tells him she wants to verify its authenticity in another room, and he agrees to let her do that as soon as he's done eating. He tells Celica he doesn't want to meet the guild master after just arriving, but Celica tells him it's already too late for that. He suddenly turns back to see that the weird guy from the reception is the guild master. The guild master introduces himself as Barlux, and he takes Shin to a private room. He asks to see Shin's letter of identification from the Moon Sanctum, and Shin puts it on the table. Barlux takes out another letter, and he places it close to Shin's letter, which makes it glow. He verifies that Shin's letter is authentic, but Shin is surprised by the process. Barlux wonders who gave Shin the verification letter. Shin tells him it was Tierra who gave him the letter, and Barlux realizes that something must have happened which made Tierra fail to explain the verification process to Shin. He informs Shin that an identification letter is the most trusted form of identification, and people try to steal it for nefarious purposes because of its importance. Barlux tells Shin to destroy the letter if he knows he won't be able to protect it, but Shin assures him that he can protect it. Barlux is pleased by Shin's answer, but he decides to test his skill. At the end of the day, Shin is extremely exhausted as he lies on his bed in an inn. He decides to raise his rank the next day after he gets his guild card. He wonders when Schnee will return to the base. He wakes up the next day, disappointed that he didn't wake up in the real world. Shin goes over to the guild and Silica welcomes him. She notices his new clothes and he tells her he decided to change because they're easier to move in, but he changed his clothes because he's a low-rank adventurer. Silica hands him his guild card and she tells him there are 9 ranks ranging from SS to S to A through to G. She informs him that he can rank up by earning points through competing tasks, and she tells him he can take up tasks that are 2 ranks higher than his rank. He shows her a job he wants to do which involves harvesting hill grass, and she tells him it's a good fit for him. Shin leaves the guild, but after searching for hours he can't find any hill grass. He's glad the monsters can be defeated by low-rank equipment, so he decides to take his time finding the grass. His sensor suddenly shows a monster nearby, and he goes to investigate. He spots the monster, and he realizes it's a high level, which makes it very strong. He decides to attack the monster, but his attacks only tickle the monster. He's surprised that an undead monster is wielding a light weapon. He decides to take off his limit, and he attacks the monster, destroying its core in one hit and bringing it down. The light sword flies off into oblivion, and Shin is sad because he wanted the sword since his sword broke after his final attack. The monster drops a gemstone and Shin decides to pick it up. He now had an idea of how things worked in the game world, and he was sure he was going to have fun. The light sword lands in the king's castle, and the king's guards wonder how it got there. The knights wonder what they'll do with the sword, and Lady Rion suggests they get an appraiser to determine the sword's composition. She also suggests that they find who launched the sword into the castle after she realizes the person who launched it must be very powerful. The villagers watch surprisingly as wounded soldiers return from their expedition. Shin wonders what happened to the soldiers, and a knight informs him that they were attacked in the northern woods by Skullface. The knight also informs him that out of the 12 soldiers, only 4 survived. Shin realizes that the soldiers are victims of the wreckage he saw in the forest. The knight also informs him that witnesses saw a sword fly out of the forest and crash into the castle, but nobody was hurt. The knight wonders if Shin knows anything about the incident, and Shin tells the soldier he was only out harvesting hilt grass. The knight tells Shin to pass on any useful information that gets to him because he's the one on the case. Shin silently apologizes to the knight for giving him extra work, but he's glad that no one was hurt by the sword. Shin goes back to the Adventurers Guild, and he's welcomed by Celica. Shin informs Celica that he's come to report in, but he wonders if the commotion caused in the town was related to Skullface. Celica informs him that a high-priority extermination request was issued because the incident happened so close to the castle. She wonders what Shin wants to report, and he tells her that he defeated the Skullface Jack. He presents her with the gem the Skullface dropped, and Celica is surprised by this. Shin informs her that the Skullface was weird because it was holding a sword and it was able to shatter his sword. Celica shoves herself in front of Shin, informing him that such a monster is not easily defeated. Shin tells her to keep out of his personal space, wondering why she's so surprised that she loses her manners. Els suddenly comes in, telling him not to tease her partner so much. She informs Shin that Celica told her about him, but Celica gives her new information, telling her that Shin defeated the Skullface Jack. Though Els is surprised, Shin informs them that he can't prove it because he didn't bring the Skullface's armor with him since it was unimpressive. Els informs him that he can't get his hands on the gear because he hasn't attained the proper rank, wondering why Shin doesn't know this even when he claims to be an adventurer. Els wants to examine the gem to see if it contains the Skullface's mana, and Celica informs Shin that they'll be borrowing the gem. Shin wonders if Skullfaces are born often in the forest, and Els informs him that undead are born when mana fuses with lingering grudges of the fallen. She informs him that a lot of people have lost their lives in the forest to monsters, and Shin realizes that the conditions are optimal for creating undead. Elf informs him that the mana level of the first shouldn't be enough to spawn a Skullface, but Shin realizes that it was a rare occurrence because the Skullface was 359. They are so surprised that Celica decides to expedite the gem's appraisal, and she asks Els to cover for her at the desk. Shin is surprised that they can appraise the gem to determine the monster's strength, but Els informs him that he is as strong as in a rank party since he was able to defeat the monster by himself. Shin begs her to keep that information to herself so he doesn't attract attention himself, and Els promises to keep his secret. Shin goes to a restaurant and he's surprised when Silica welcomes him because he didn't expect her to be working in the restaurant. She leads him to a table, but she wants him to share the table and Shin agrees because he feels awkward sitting alone. Avis suddenly enters the restaurant and everyone's heads turn as he walks to join Shin at his table. Shin observes that he carries the magic spear named Venom, which is a legendary weapon whose abilities rival mythic arms. Avis settles himself at Shin's table and Shin introduces himself to Avis. Avis wonders if he's a new adventurer and Shin informs him that it's just his third day as an adventurer. Avis notices that his equipment says otherwise because it's better than average armor, and Shin informs him that he's not from around the castle, so he doesn't know what's normal around those parts. Avis now realizes why Shin wasn't scared of his name. Shin wonders what he did to make people scared of him, and he informs Shin that he's named Avis the Vampire because he hunts down undead creatures. Shin thought he earned the nickname because of his complexion, but Avis tells him the real reason is because Venom has the Drain ability, which consumes its victim's life force and transfers it to the wielder. Avis was worried that Venom would consume him before he knew it. Silica comes back with their meals and they dig in. The next day, Shin heads to the library because he hasn't been in one in a long time. He hoped he would be able to learn something new as he grabbed a history book off the shelf about the kingdom. He realized that the kingdom was created about 511 years prior, which was around the same time people vanished. Shin decides to do more research, and he finds out the people in that world are the same as the in-game options. Shin decides to leave the library because he has gotten all the information he can from the books. Barlux calls a guild council meeting and he informs them that the Skullface has been slain and the gem returned by the hero adventure is being examined. The knights wonder why the Slayer didn't take the Skullface's armor. They are surprised when they are informed that the player didn't find it impressive. One of the knights informs the council that the appraisal confirmed that the Skullface was indeed level 359. Barlux is glad to have clarification, but he wonders if there are similar monsters around that area. A knight informs them that she has already dispatched soldiers to the area to investigate, and they'll get their answer the next day. Barlux knows that the Skullfaces are usually active at night, and he asks the knights to be on guard whenever night falls. One knight wonders what unusual weapon the Skullface carried and who slayed the Skullface. Barlux informs him that he can talk about the Skullface's weapon, but the Slayer wants their identity kept secret. The knight wanted to know if the appearance of the strange sword in the castle was related to the defeat of the Skullface. Barlux wonders what kind of sword it is, and the knight informs him that it's an alloy of magic steel and mithril. He informs them that it was also enchanted with light elements, which makes them realize the sword may be on par with their nation's royal sword. Barlux realizes the sword is legendary level, and the knight tells him his curiosity about the Skullface Slayer is justified. He also informs them that there's some trouble and they wonder what it is. Shin is sitting at a fountain, bummed out that he's having a hard time gathering information. He's eating some steak, wondering what to do next. He suddenly notices a beast girl staring at him, and he gives her some steak. He realizes that she's a tiger-type girl, but she doesn't look like a beggar. He wonders if she's lost, but she suddenly thanks him for the food. She introduces herself as Millie, and she's glad that Shin is a nice guy. Shin introduces himself to her, and he informs her that he's heading home since it's getting late. He wonders if she's heading home as well, and she informs him that Avis is here to pick her up. Shin is surprised to run into Avis again, and he wonders if Millie is his kid. Avis informs him that Millie is one of the orphanages at the church, but she's very good at sneaking out, and he's the one in charge of finding her. Avis is surprised that she's taking a liking to Shin because she's usually shy. Avis wants to take Millie home, but Millie runs to Shin and asks him to help save some foxes in the northern woods. Avis takes Millie home and Shin goes home thinking about the favor Millie asked of him. He wonders why she chose to ask him for help, but he decides to go anyway since he doesn't have anything to do till Schnee returns. He suddenly remembers that he has a way to reach Schnee and decides to give it a shot. Shin heads to the Moon Sanctum the next day, and he informs Tiara that he forgot to leave a message the other day. He drops a sword, and he tells Tiara to inform Schnee to seek him out if she recognizes the weapon. Tiara recognizes the sword as an ancient weapon, and Shin informs her that the sword is named Blue Moon, and it belongs to Schnee's world. Shin informs her that only he, Schnee, or people they designate can use it. Tiara realizes the sword is very powerful, but she informs Shin she wouldn't want to wield it because she feels it could swallow her whole. Shin starts telling her about the composition of the sword, but he notices she's getting a headache trying to process it. Tiara is exhausted because things stop making sense whenever Shin is around, and he apologizes to her. He just wants to know if Schnee would remember him or not, and Tiara decides to hold on to the swords for him. He hands her some letters and informs her that she can use them to reach him whenever Schnee returns. He enlightens her on how to use the mail, but she wonders why Shin can't send Schnee a message directly. Shin informs her that he tried the previous night, but they were not successful. Tiara wonders if the items work, and Shin decides to test out the item. He goes outside the base and a mail suddenly appears in front of Tiara. Tiara informs him that she got the mail, and Shin is now convinced that the item works. Shin figures out that the mail is dependent on whether he's met the recipient in the new world or not. Tiara asks him for a few letters, and he decides to give her some since he has excess. She informs him that she's trying to become a mage, so she wants to study magic items. Shin decides to hand her some letters as payment for having his message delivered to Schnee. Shin leaves the Moon Sanctum base, and Tiara wonders if she should send one of the letters to her master. Shin heads over to the northern woods, but when he arrives, he has no idea about how to save the foxes. He moves through the forest, trying to head deeper, but he enters an invincible barrier, and a voice suddenly starts telling him to leave. Shin wonders why he's getting mental interference after enhancing his resistance to it. He takes it as a sign that something strong is up ahead, so he decides to head deeper into the forest. He arrives at a shrine, and he realizes that the mental interference is now gone. He concludes that the shrine is the center of the barrier, but as he walks through the gate, he hears something shatter in the distance. He enters the shrine, and he sees a fox lying in a magic circle. Shin doesn't see any traps set up, so he decides to go to the aid of the fox, but he realizes that the fox is almost giving up the ghost. He decides to cure it, and the fox suddenly regains consciousness. Shin hears another barrier breaking in the distance, and he comes out to see himself surrounded by undead soldiers. He decides to take them all down because he doesn't want more casualties after the Skullface incident. The undead soldiers rush at Shin, but he uses his magic sword to take them down, but the game system shows him two new enemies. He realizes that the fox statues weren't previously on the pedestals. They suddenly break out of the sculpture and grow to towering sizes. Shin is surprised because he's never seen anything like that, and he's even more surprised that the golem foxes are level 674. The foxes attack him with their magic, and he realizes the aura around them is making them behave erratically. Shin decides to take care of the foxes because he doesn't want them to roam freely. He uses shadows to immobilize them, and the foxes create a smoke screen that hurts the fox Shin is trying to save. He decides to finish the battle quickly when the foxes start attacking him, and he realizes his shadows have worn off. Shin is about to use his full power, but the fox directs him to the magic circle it was in. Shin is glad the smoke screen didn't wear off the magic circles, and the foxes notice this too. They rush at Shin, but he uses magic chains to hold them, and he finishes them off with a cataclysmic strike from his magic spear. Shin realizes the miasma is now gone, and he decides to check the little fox's features. He realizes the fox is an elemental, but he's surprised that it's so small because elementals are usually colossal. Shin decides to take the fox as his companion. Meanwhile, Schnee receives a magic letter from Tiara, and she wonders how Tiara got her hands on such a magic item. She opens the letter, and she's surprised by its contents. Watch this next video. See you on the next one.